Shut up and sit down.
Hi and welcome to Control-Alt-Delete/Church. This week we are delighted to welcome Martin Fair. Martin, you have a new job. So what is it?
Well, to be honest, I'm still working it out, Stewart. I am ordinarily and have been for over 28 years the minister at St Andrew's Church in Arbroath, a place I know and love so well now. But as of, a couple of weeks ago, I was installed as the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Before that, go back 6 months, I had a fairly good idea of what that was going to look like. But talk about Control-Alt-Delete, what applies to the role of moderator. And to begin with, as everything was changing, that was quite disorientating. I have to say now, I'm the first moderator, really, probably in living memory, who's essentially been handed a blank piece of paper and asked to go and do something with the role. And that appeals to me, it really does.
Brilliant. That's an exciting but slightly daunting situation, isn't it? So you've known you were going to be moderator for ages. You know, the process happens quite far in advance, doesn't it?
It does. We've got a really interesting process. On the day that a moderator is installed, within 1 hour, the committee has been elected to find his or her replacement, which is a great way of keeping people's feet on the ground. And then let me just call it recruitment process, for want of a better phrase, it kicks in really in the summer, or summer before the year that it might come to pass. So this year, the interview stage took place in September, and that evening I got a phone call, and I'll tell you straight, I fell over with surprise. I mean, genuinely was happy to allow my name to go forward for consideration after a lot of prayerful thinking, but genuinely didn't think it would actually come to pass. So I got a phone call in September, it's you. And so yes, since September through to March, so make that 6 months, I'd all of that time planning and preparing for what this year as moderator was going to look like. And then honestly, within the space of 2 weeks, everything came crumbling down around me. That's a great lesson in life. It really is about your plans and about your futuristic sort of state of mind. Hey, it's all provisional, and we've learned that big time now.
Absolutely. So where were you when lockdown happened? Because for most folk, I was in my church. Where were you?
I was in Edinburgh, Stewart. The moderator has there is an official residence, as it were, for the moderator to allow him or her to be apart from the demands of the local parish situation. Now, I wasn't actually into that flat because clearly the current moderator then, Colin, was still there. So I was in a furlough flat in, gosh, the word furlough's come a lot more popular nowadays. I was in a furlough flat in Edinburgh, but I only ended up being there about 2.5 weeks before I came back, because at that time it was becoming evident that lockdown was going to kick in big time. Whatever I had planned for moderator was not going to be happening, at least for the short term. So it made sense for me to come back and be with my family rather than isolated in a flat in Edinburgh. Nice as Morningside was, it was good to come home.
Yeah, so that's an unusual situation then, because obviously for the moderators, as you said, is removed from their congregation if they're still in post for the year of their office. Yes. So you now find yourself back in the manse in Arbroath with a blank diary. So that, how's that feeling for you? Because I would imagine it's odd being, having expected not to be there, to be back there in the middle of a crisis and not really being the minister of Arbroath St Andrews at the moment.
It is a bit odd, and I think it's probably odd for my congregation too, because on the first Sunday of March, I got a kind of farewell. We had a lunch, there was a cake, and not exactly balloons and streamers, but it was one of those farewells. They sent me out with their blessing, and then hello, I'm back. But not quite. So at the moment, I'm really trying to juggle both roles at the Stewart, and if I'm brutally honest, I'm not sure how long I'll be able to do that. I decided to come back and try that because it looked to me like the diary of the moderator was empty.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, look, I didn't sign up to be redundant and twiddling my thumbs. I can probably be more useful in Arbroath, so I come back to that. However, that was 10 weeks ago, and now that I'm actually into the role of moderator, now that we're really beginning to grasp the digital possibilities, I'm seeing that I'm going to be far from redundant. In fact, there is much for me to do. So there will come a point, probably sooner rather than later, that I'll extricate myself from from any attempt at ministering in St Andrews and just go for the moderator role full time, and the time will come for that quite soon. However, let me just say this: there are some upsides. This last week, I've had 2 funerals, for example. Now, no moderator normally has anything like that to deal with. You're completely relieved of all of your normal duties. And I can see the point in that. But what it does mean is that as I'm thinking about things nationally, as I'm maybe sharing reflections and so on as moderator from a national perspective, I'm doing so with my feet absolutely rooted on the ground and in a parish, in a community that is happening. So do you see what I'm saying? There may be some upsides to that. And to give you another example, I mean, just on Tuesday of this week, I was working away at food distribution. I mean, I personally get involved in that kind of thing because I think, again, it's good for ministers just to be, at least at some points, at the sharp end.
Yeah.
So there's the moderator of the assembly, just getting amongst vulnerable families, supporting and assisting. And I think that's really good in one way to help me to be seeing things through a local lens, though trying to address things nationally. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it's always been the criticism of people who teach in any kind of way, isn't it? That as soon as you get good enough to teach other people how to do it, you're removed from the situation that you found yourself in the first place. So it makes perfect sense that when you phone somebody up or you speak to them like this, you can you're having a conversation about what you're both doing. You're not having it's not a philosophical conversation for you. It's a real conversation.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And let me just tell you a bit about one of those funerals I referred to. It was just one of the dearest guys in our congregation, an elder, and someone who, well, respect absolutely, but someone who was absolutely loved. Just one of the nicest human beings you would ever meet. And what an inspiration as a Christian man. So to have that funeral yesterday and not to be able to do it in the normal ways, I know absolutely that ministers, congregations across the nation and further afield are dealing with that, struggling with that at the moment. And many folks from the church lined the route yesterday from the person's house. And I think it was actually, Stewart, you were kind of key to that, trying to almost revive that practice of just stopping when a cortege would go past. And I can remember that. I remember that, the first funeral I can remember was my grandpa's, and there was men at the side of the street that would take their caps off, they would stand in respect. And that's gone. I mean, in recent times, none of that. So to see some of that back again, it was moving, touching. This is what we mean when we talk about communities, isn't it?
Absolutely. I had exactly the same experience yesterday. I had a funeral, and the guy lived just round the corner from me, so I just drove out and joined the cortege. But the whole of the estate had people standing out, and we drove through the village, and people stopped. And it really does make such a difference to the family, because they feel so disconnected at this time, and you go to the funeral and there's a handful of people, and it, that it wouldn't have been that. It'd have been a church full of people. And that's really difficult for folk. But to see people making the effort, even just to turn round and bow their head, makes a massive difference to people.
I think it does. I wonder, Stewart, if you've any thoughts on this, but what I'm hearing from lots of ministers, and I've said it myself, to families that are grieving in those lockdown circumstances, therefore a funeral that might have had 300 people there's got 12, this kind of thing. and everybody's saying, or what I'm hearing people saying is, but once lockdown's over, we'll be able to have a service of thanksgiving of some kind. And while I absolutely see the possibility of that, and begin to think, gosh, are we building up for ourselves this huge workload? And I mean, that's putting it as basic terms, but are we literally going to have one after another, day after day of Thanksgiving services? And so two things come to mind about that. One, might it be that we want to do those things collectively as communities together rather than individual? And the second thing, from a pastoral point of view, it might be some time till anything like that's possible. And will there be families who actually don't want to open those things up again? They feel actually we've moved on, we've done what we have to do by way of the grieving process, and we're happy with that. And I wouldn't want there to be pressure on people to feel that they have to have an aftermath lockdown Thanksgiving service. Does that chime with you?
It absolutely does. And the conversation about a memorial service tends to happen before the funeral, in my experience.
Yeah.
And after the funeral, it seems much less important. And I hear things like, well, that wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be.
Well, there's high praise.
Yeah. And I think
saying.
they mean that in terms of, we didn't expect it to be as full or as significant, or the kinds of things that they were dreading, because there's only a small number of people.
Well,
it wouldn't mean as much, or it wouldn't be as dignified, or I don't know. There's probably a whole load of things, but most of it's about the unknown, isn't it? That we just don't know what this is going to look like. We know it's not going to be what we wanted or expected. But afterwards, folk have, and a number of people have said, I'm actually quite glad in some respects that it was just the family, because we didn't have to do all of the stuff that goes around that sometimes people are really uncomfortable with, or you need to speak to people when you don't feel like speaking to anybody, and all that kind of stuff. So there's, while it's not probably as satisfactory in some senses, in other ways it maybe is. And I think you're right. I think by the time we get to the point where we're allowed to have a large gathering of all the community, it might be that's what we do. We have a gathering of all the community, and we give thanks for everyone and celebrate their lives and do that together. And I think that might be a much more powerful thing to do, I think for the community as well as for those who are grieving.
Yeah, I think quite possibly. And you're right, I've noticed that as well. People have come to funerals in these situations not knowing what to expect, and I've actually found it to be beautifully personal and intimate, and without the strain and stress, necessarily of lineups, shaking hands with countless people, many of whom they might not even know. Put yourself into those normal circumstances, because it could be work colleagues or people that are not in their immediate remit, and that is a stress and strain. So there are things that probably working quite well. I know exactly what you meant by somebody saying it wasn't as bad as thought it might be. I'm going to hang on to that wee phrase, because it gives me a picture of somebody showing up at church on a Sunday morning who's never been to church before, and they leave after and say, "Minister, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be." That would be high praise, wouldn't it?
I'd much rather have that than nice hymns.
Nice hymns, yeah. We've all been damned by that faint praise.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes the hymns are nice. So that's a part of your role now that is different. I was mocking you slightly on Facebook yesterday because you've offered a service for this week, for the whole of the Church of Scotland, which has been hugely appreciated. But at the same point, you don't have worship to prepare for a congregation every week. So is that something that it's obviously different, but is it something you think you're going to miss? And how do you, what are your expectations around about that? Because Colin set himself into a kind of a daily reflection, which is a huge commitment to make. So what are you thinking in terms of worship and your contribution to that?
Yeah, I want to actually absolutely take my hat off to Colin, and Ruth. I mean, they all, obviously operated as a very clear team, And I think they offered us exactly what was needed at that point in time. If you look at the social media response to those daily reflections, we're talking something 10, 11,000 people viewed those reflections. So clearly there was a need, and clearly they were able to answer that. But you move through seasons, and I think what was pertinent then becomes somewhat less so as you go on. Different things become important. So I've tried to be quite clear from the beginning that I was not going to attempt that. I wasn't going to set myself up with, something that would 2 weeks in would become really difficult. So I'm not going to do that. Neither, Stewart, do I have an exact plan of what it's going to look like. I'm stepping out at the moment. I'm finding my way into it. But you started by asking how, am I going to miss leading worship and so on? Absolutely. I mean, I love so much of what parish ministry is all about, and that is essentially who I am. This year of service to the national church, I'm humbled to have been given the opportunity, and very humbled that colleagues would think that you're worthy of it. But when all's said and done, I'll be going back to being a parish minister. That's my calling. And as part of parish ministry, I think if you were really to hold me to answer it, I would say this: my favourite part of that is leading worship. Whether that be our Sunday morning offering or Wednesday and so on, but I love the leading of worship, and even within that, I love the preaching exercise. So yeah, I'll find ways to continue that, of course, but missing the week to week with a family of God's people, working through some themes and things with them, yeah, I'm going to miss that for sure. And you mentioned the national service of Pentecost that put together. I've really, really enjoyed being part of that. It's not just been a case of, well, I'll do a service. It really is an act of collaboration, and I really hope it's well received. That it really tries to reflect the church across Scotland at this time.
Yeah. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it was also timely. You talked about seasons that I think we've come to. It's Pentecost, and if it's a perfect opportunity for the church to get together and to share in a kind of collective act of worship, which is it's just perfect. That there are times when things come and you just think, oh, well, that's what's going to happen.
Sure.
Well, why wouldn't you do that? And it's come at a point where I think people are ready for it too. It's not just that it's Pentecost, so we'll do this. It's Pentecost. We're 10, 11 weeks into lockdown. Wouldn't it be great if we could all get together?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that, and I've been really pleased, and again I'll use the word humbled, and I genuinely mean it that way, to see ministers or sending me messages or just posting things like, I've been able to actually rest a little more this week because I've not got worship to prepare. So if it simply functions in that way to give people a break, then I'm delighted, and I'll say job done. But as you were saying there, I hope it will be more than that there really will be a sense of togetherness and purposefulness about it. But let me go back to this. I mean, I'm a parish minister, and my ecclesiology roots the church in the local. You can't have denominations if you don't have local churches. So for me, the purest or the nearest thing to an expression of what church is a group of local people. So worship should come in and be rooted in local expressions. So this Pentecost service is not by any way to sort of somehow downgrade that, and it's a kind of one-off. That said, I think the only other thing that I may be thinking about, to come back to the idea of just giving people a break, is that I might produce a couple of services that would be quite generic, and not in any sense that everybody would stop and watch them, but just to make them available to ministers for July and August, so that again, ministers might be able to say, great, listen, we might not be able to go to Tenerife, but we might still be trying to get a week off, and please God, ministers are trying to get a break in times of holiday and all of this. So if that would be the case, then there would be a service they could go to. So churches could just pick it up and use it, not a big national viewing, just something that I would make available to churches to use in their situation as it suited them. So that's kind of in my head at the moment.
That's brilliant, and a really creative response to a problem I think that we all feel at the moment. You know, I spoke to Shuna Dix a couple of weeks ago, and Shuna had a week off, and she spent the week at home, but while everyone else around her was working. So that was a really odd experience for her. And I've had colleagues who've taken a week off, and by 2 days in, they were bored out their head because they couldn't go anywhere and do anything. But we still need to have time off.
We do.
And one of the worries of that is, well, if I'm the person that's creating all of this stuff, how do I do that? How do I get time off without having to do twice as much the week before? And so that's a fabulous gift to be able to give to the church.
Well, certainly that's the plan. And, this business about trying to get a week's holiday, gosh, you need such discipline, particularly if you use your phone for all of life, because, you're using it personally. But unless you've got a sort of twin track system going on, then your email pops in, and the discipline required just to shut that off, maybe take out your notifications for a week. But unless we do, there is no escaping from it. And I have to say, one of my roles as moderator is coming as a concern for ministers, more widely just than ministers. But being a minister myself, a particular affinity with ministers, and I want to try, if I can, to let ministers know of that support that's there, even if it's just me. And one thing that I'm started out on, talk about setting myself a challenge. I really am going to try and contact every single minister on the phone and just talking. And I have started, and it really is phoning up saying hello. First of all, people are, what? The moderator's phoning me. But then I'm saying to them, how are you doing? And they say, well, do you want to talk about church? I was like, no, how are you doing? Literally, how are you doing? And I've, and then I'm praying with people. And you see, here's the thing: in a normal moderator year, the moderator's so caught up with engagements, visiting here, there, and everywhere, it would be inconceivable that they could start to literally phone their colleagues in ministry. But there's an opportunity. I've started out. I hope I can manage it and get to the end of it, because for no other reason, I'm really enjoying speaking to my colleagues. Lots of folk I've never met, never had conversations with, but we've got one thing in common. You start talking and it goes really good. And I'm aware that some ministers are thriving in present circumstances and some are really struggling. And I'm trying to be ears, just to sense how people are and where people are at.
That's brilliant. And I'm sure will be hugely appreciated, if not surprising, for folk.
Maybe both.
Because part of your year would have been to visit a couple of presbyteries and to go overseas and to represent the church in all different kinds of ways. And so you get to see, I suppose, in the presbytery visit, you get to see a kind of a snapshot of
Sure.
those two presbyteries, and you would get to meet people. But as you said, and that's a quick visit, a dinner, it's a snatched conversation that's never really the same kind of quality of conversation that you'll be able to have with people on the phone.
Yeah, it definitely gets more personal. And, I'm just thinking about even some of the people I phoned yesterday who really opened up, very honestly about their situation. That's not going to happen in a church hall with a cup of tea and a dainty sandwich. I suspect most of that would be small talk. Yeah. But getting to talk to people on the phone in this way, it's going to be a challenge because that's a lot of people. But I think it is possible, and I think it will be profitable. If only for me, it would be profitable because I'm hearing, and I know it's an old cliche, Stewart, but we're given one mouth and two ears, and so in my role as moderator, I want to listen to where the church is at.
One of the things we've been forced into is creative responses. So your installation was a creative response to where we found ourselves, and I found it a deeply moving service. To see the firstly, that it happened at all.
Yeah.
That they were able to put it together in such a kind of short space of time. But it didn't. It was a bit like the response to the funeral. It wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been, and actually, it was in some ways much more moving than normal, because it's an exception, and the creativity and the I suppose the kind of the compassion that was in it was just amazing to see.
Really interested to hear you saying that, because it chimes with how I experienced it. My worst fears there were that it was going to be a complete non-event. That hall as well as I do, Stewart, and you could pack 1,000 people in there if you go for it. And the thought of being in an empty hall with half a dozen people plus some tech, I thought, what is this going to feel like? So we showed up in the day, and honestly, from the moment I walked in, and I really want to pay tribute to the folks like Michael Mayer. Michael heads up our assembly arrangements, and Michael gave everything of himself to that service to make it special and to make it work. And I'm really grateful to Michael and the many others. And then the tech people. Listen, I probably shouldn't start naming names because I'll forget some, but the whole bunch of people who made that happen. And it became, for me and for the family, a really very special experience. I felt undoubtedly the presence of God right there. And also, though they weren't there, I felt myself surrounded by God's people. I knew, people are joining online, but it's hard to describe. I sensed them right there with me. So it was very, very special. And when Colin invited me to kneel, literally to be installed, with that prayer, when one of our more senior moderators, the very Reverend Jimmy Simpson, came on and spoke a word to me, I don't know how I spoke after that. It was so moving. I was really breaking up, with the emotion of it. And as you've said, I think other people, well, some people at least, experienced in that way as well. Somebody wrote me a lovely letter and said that they'd been at 22 General Assemblies, and this installation had spoken to them more than any of the other ones before. And the point they were making was that although this person, loves the assembly, they were recognising that a lot of the pageantry, for goodness sake, we've got regiments of trumpeters on the steps, dressed in medieval costumes. We've got all of the pageantry, all of the stuff that's associated with it. And strip that away, and you're left with something very simple but very special. And I think in all years to come, I'll look back and say, do you know what? I'm quite thankful it actually was like that. It was really special. That's not to say that other moderators have not experienced it special in their way, but how it was for me, I don't regret it. It was really special.
And we're all called to serve in our time and in our way. Yeah. And as you said, to have your plans ripped up a couple of weeks before, and to be presented with, well, Martin, you are our moderator, and this is the situation, and it doesn't matter what that situation is, that you've been called to this role for this year. And I think that in some ways that installation was much more appropriate than it would have been to have a General Assembly and then for this to happen 6 months or 6 weeks later.
I agree.
And it kind of it spoke to the moment.
Yeah, I think it did. And, I'm going to just take that on a little bit, Stewart. When it was first becoming clear that it wasn't going to happen as ordinarily, absolutely, I was hit with initial disappointment. But I'm past that, that's for sure. But in the earlier conversations, or you're thinking about it, no assembly, really nothing to do after that. I actually voiced in some conversations with people within the church, what do you think about, could the church actually just not have a moderator this year? And such things that might crop up well, we've got a team of former moderators who could step up and fill certain situations. And that really was a possibility in my mind back then when it first became clear. But folks, I think wiser and more, who were thinking further ahead than me at that point said, no, we're going to need a moderator this year as never before. Yeah. So I was persuaded by that. And now that I'm here, the better part of a fortnight or whatever it is in, I'm beginning to see that there is going to be a role for me. And it's exciting and, big sense of responsibility as well. Yeah. And so many people have sent messages praying for you at this time. Our congregation's praying for you. Without that, Stewart, I really would feel like out on a limb. But I'm feeling myself massively supported, and that's a lovely place to be.
Brilliant. One of the things that would have happened at General Assembly is we would have had another conversation about radical reform, because that's what we do every year at General Assembly. We've been having that conversation forever.
It seems with talking about radical.
Yeah, we are very, very, and all of a sudden it's happened. Yeah. That all of those, like your plans, all of those plans have been torn up, thrown out the window, and here we are. Church is massively different in some ways than it was 12 weeks ago. So how do you see that going forward? That we've kind of got to a place probably now where those congregations that have kind of made the move to online worship in whatever format that's taken are getting reasonably comfortable with it now. It's becoming less of a kind of terrifying prospect to have to sit and talk to your phone once a week and then to wonder if it's going to upload to whatever platform you're using. We're kind of settling into that a wee bit. Yeah. So what do you think in terms of, you've mentioned that that there are possibilities for your year, but also for the church. So how do you see all that kind of playing out? What are the things that have been good about what have happened?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, just a word about the radical plan, how you introduced this question. We've talked about it, and not just in the last couple of years. I mean, you go back to maybe the Church Without Walls, and folks with longer memories than me will tell you about plans. But with any big institution, and probably the older institution, the more so, it's extremely difficult to turn that around. And I mean, I've heard people right at the centre of the institution crying out to, we want to change too, and yet somehow an inertia kicks in. Now, you've got to be really careful how you handle the theology there, because I, for one, will not be saying anytime soon or at all that God has visited COVID on us to achieve something in the church. That's not my God, However, I think what God is able to do is out of any situation to bring good stuff. And so if I can put it somewhat colloquially or lightheartedly, I maybe think that God's kind of said, okay, guys, I give you every opportunity to get your house in order and give yourself a good shake over and a spring clean. You aren't getting there anytime soon, so how about you get on with it now? Now, that's to put it in quite light-hearted tones, but maybe that is the effect of it. And we are discovering all kinds of new possibilities. I embrace that wholeheartedly. I think, Stewart, at the same time, I would want to say that I am a little concerned, worried, fearful that as human beings, our natural default is often to go back. And so, we're experimenting right now. We're doing all that kind of stuff. But let's say, I mean, for argument's sake, it won't happen. But let's say, for argument's sake, that it was announced you can go back to church next Sunday, no restrictions, everybody can gather again. Boy, we'd be right there. We'd probably be right there. It's been announced that McDonald's drive-thrus are open again. Well, I've been getting on perfectly well without my Big Macs, thank you very much. But you watch, the queues for those drive-thrus. We've got this instinct to go back. Now, I think what we're going to look at probably more profitably as we go forward is a kind of twin track approach. I heard it put yesterday by another minister that we're going to probably have to pursue analog church and digital church. I think that's right. I'm not, and I haven't heard anybody proposing, great, we're doing it digital now. We never have to go back in a church building. I don't think that's, that's reasonable or realistic. But if going back to the church building meant that we weren't going to do the digital anymore, that would be a travesty. It really would. And even within that, I'd want to say that I think the church is going to have to be really creative about what it does, because I know that what I would do on a Sunday morning, the content of that, the style of that, I honestly think that cuts it out there in the world. So when I say twin track, I think for my own self, I think I'd be looking at, getting church services in the traditional sense back up and running again, but also producing content to engage online with younger people, with people who are not going to walk through the doors of the church. So I think it's both, and that's got all sorts of implications for prioritizing, for ministry time and stuff like that. We need to work that out.
Yeah. And some of that's still so unknown, isn't it? But I think we've all realised that this digital thing, it works. I was loving that one of your first responses to everybody being locked in the house was to try and bring us all together in community through a quiz, which was just great. And when you started that, you must have had absolutely no idea if anybody would tune into that. It could have been just you sitting there reading questions to nobody, or to 3 people, or to 300 devices.
Even that I would have enjoyed. I love quizzes so much, even though I was answering my own questions. But yeah, you're right. Absolutely took off. And I mean, in the end, like thousands of people took part in that quiz the world over. And look, in similar kind of ways, when I think I first had my first Zoom meeting or Teams meeting or whatever it was, or even trying to do something in Facebook Messenger, I was going into that thinking like, well, I suppose this is the only way it's going to work. We'll just have to do that. But now that we're familiar with the environment and with the way it works, it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, for somebody that was quite committed and involved with the workings of the national church, ordinarily, I was in Edinburgh minimum once or twice a week. So that's 3 to 4 hours of travel time, every occasion. Not to mention the expense, better part of £50, return rail ticket, Arbroath to Edinburgh. And not to mention the environmental impact of all that travelling. So, yeah, there's loads of ways that we're discovering right now. And again, I want to say, I'm not suggesting we'll never meet again face to face. I mean, of course we do. We're humans, we need to be together. But there are lots of tools and things available to us now that we must maximise as we go forward.
So what do you see? Some of that's incredibly exciting. We've all noticed that we've been engaging with people who haven't really engaged with Sunday morning services and all that kind of stuff. But also, obviously, raises some issues, doesn't it? That to watch a 20-minute video on Facebook isn't the same level of engagement or commitment as getting up on a Sunday and going to be with a group of people physically. So, and then there's all kinds of questions around about, well, how do you disciple people online? How do they learn more, or do they only ever kind of tune in on a Sunday and that's enough? And the reality of that is that we have no idea whether that's what the people who are sitting in front of us on a Sunday are doing too. Right. They might be tuned in for some of what's happening, but they might not. So is there a difference? Are we going to see a plethora of new digital discipleship tools? And what do you think that looks like?
I'd love to think so, because I think you're absolutely right. 20-minute views on Facebook goes so far, but not far enough. Even then, probably a word of caution. I don't know, Stewart, if you've ever looked at some of the Facebook analytics, but it's absolutely scary. You might start off with so many viewers, but you look at the stats about how many are there for the whole of that duration, and it's actually not as many as you would like it to be. But again, maybe it was the same in church when you started preaching, everybody was there, and by the end of the sermon, you had 10% following. I'm just making the point that the way the web works, and particularly YouTube and such things, people fly from one to another. They really do. And they will dip in for a short part of your offering and not necessarily to commit to it all. So is that kind of engagement going to lead to discipleship? Is it going to lead to followers of Christ? Then, wow, one would have to be somewhat skeptical about that. Let me trail something that's coming up quite soon on the 8th of June, Sanctuary First. Now, you'll know, big online presence. They've been really pioneering, in Scotland in that way for some time. They're holding a sort of webinar conference on the 8th of January. It really is going to be thinking about those questions you've picked up. How do we go further? How do we really begin to engage with people beyond them just watching? And that is the next stage. It absolutely is. I don't come here today with a bunch of answers to that, but I absolutely know those are the questions we need to be asking.
And that's often the best place to start, isn't it? Working out what the right question is.
Correct.
I think is that you talked about about leading worship every week. For me, that's one of the things I love about it is spending time wondering what's the right question about this. And if we can get to that, then that leads us into a whole rich seam of conversation and exploration together and growth together. And
Stuart, in that shouldn't please not that be ministers and worship leaders dreaming up the questions. Got to ask people, what are your questions? Genuinely, I remember in a worship service, we do a Wednesday service ordinarily. We've done it for 20 years actually, and it's a smaller gathering. It's more informal, it's more engagement. And in one of those Wednesday services, I remember actually saying to people, so what's the stuff you worry about in life? Not presuming that I would know the answer, but just asking them that. And they all wrote stuff down. And the three things that emerged, if I remember right, were family, health, money. Or, in that kind of order. Most people touched on that. We worry about our family, that our family's going to be okay. Health for ourselves, for other people. Money, are we managing? What's my pension going to look like? So those were the kind of things. And I listened to that and I thought, well, the gospel needs to address those, those things that are real for people. So let's not have ministers in their studies with rows of books behind them. We've talked a lot about that, sort of coming up with answers to questions that are not even been asked. So in this online digital world, we must be engaging with people in two-way conversations and not think that just putting out endless monologues is going to cut it.
Yeah, and that involves learning a new kind of dialogue, doesn't it? So that's not just about me posting content. That's about me paying attention to what people are saying about that and encouraging that conversation alongside it.
Yeah.
I've got, you can see a whiteboard up there. I've occasionally write things on it, and one of the things I that was up there for ages is, how do you drive engagement? It's not, I can post content twice a day, every day, forever, and it is completely pointless if it doesn't drive engagement.
Correct.
So how do you do that? How do you engage somebody you've never met before, potentially, in a conversation, and at the same time minister to people that live next door and up the street that you do know? And it's a tricky kind of balancing act, isn't it?
Absolutely. Let me offer a couple of things into that, which are not necessarily restricted to the kind of digital world we're in, but which could apply forever. First of all, to say that I chatted to a minister not that long ago, a fairly new minister, and listen, see those of us who have been in ministry roles for a longer time, we have got to continually get ourselves alongside newer ministers to be learning from them, and I'm committed to that. Anyway, this reasonably new minister was telling me that what he is doing is he goes with his draft of his sermon into a coffee shop, right? And he actually goes up and sits beside a complete random and first of all invites himself, would you mind? He's got a few manners about him, but then, assuming that's allowed, he actually then goes on to say, by the way, I'm a minister and I'm working on a sermon for Sunday, and would you do me an enormous favour and actually read it? Wow. So he actually hands over a manuscript of his sermon. This random in the cafe, well, okay, reads it through, And then the minister says, so what do you think about it? And then they have a conversation. Now, this is largely speaking, going to be a person that probably doesn't do church or anywhere near that. But he then redrafts his sermon based on that conversation. Stewart, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I really
That's
do.
incredible.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
There's another idea which I've read about and worked with a little bit, but never took it to its full possibility. And it's a more internal church thing than what I've just described, but I still think there's merit in it. There's a book and it's called The Round Table Pulpit. And what this book espouses is that the minister sits with like a focus group, if you want to use that terminology, members of the church, although, you could broaden it out. Sits with them on the Monday of the week, and they look together at the Bible passages that are going to be relevant that coming Sunday. They just throw it around together. The minister listens to what people are saying, listens to the questions that are being raised by the people. Then the sermon is composed. And I love that way of thinking as well, that therefore the sermon is more a dialogue coming out of what people are actually saying and doing. I don't think we're doing nearly enough of that kind of stuff.
We do a little bit of that. We have morning prayers on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And on the Tuesday, we look at the Old Testament reading for the Sunday coming. And on the Thursday, we look at the Gospel.
Is that something you're doing now digitally, or you were doing anyway?
Yeah, both. We did do it, and we do it in Zoom.
Wow.
And it's fascinating because by the time I get to Thursday, I've been thinking about obviously what I might say, but I tend not to have written by then. I like the pressure of a deadline. But it's amazing how often what I'm thinking changes completely because of that conversation.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I love that. And then one of the first things I said when I came here, so I've been here pretty much 3 years. Today or tomorrow, I think it's the kind of anniversary of coming. So my first Kirk session meeting, I said, look, I want feedback on my preaching. I want to know what you think. And I don't mean coming up and say, oh, that was really nice, Stewart, thanks. I want to know what you think. And there's this kind of astonishment that what do you mean? And you think, well, how on earth, my background is, as you know, one of the first times we met was when I came to your church as I must have been about 12 to talk about youth work. And so my kind of culture has been in that sort of reflective practice, evaluative stuff, evidence-based practice kind of thing. And then you go into ministry and you ask people, well, what do you think of what's just happened? And they don't have either the tools or the language sometimes or the practice. No. I've been able to reflect on that. So it's really difficult sometimes to create a conversation that's helpful for me and that kind of 360 kind of thing and they're getting much better at it. That I think they once they realised I wasn't kidding, that people have started to really engage with that, and it's been brilliant. But it was hard work at the start to get people to be, to honestly say, well, not sure about what you were saying there or how you were saying it. People weren't comfortable criticising the guy in the pulpit.
No, I mean, it's much more work, far easier. I mean, listen, I could rattle out services any day of the week, but to do it in an engaging manner, somehow sensing dialogue, it's definitely much harder. But there's also the theology going on here in terms of the, understanding what preaching is, and there might be those who really see themselves, to coin a phrase, 6 feet above contradiction. I'm anointed for this, I'm appointed for this, God dispenses to me, and I'm sort of almost a priestly function, almost, I am the conduit through which this word will come to you. And the 6 feet of contradiction being, maybe up in the pulpit and so on. For my own part, my understanding of the preacher is one of the people, and really this does borrow from Calvin, who is one of the people who is asked for that moment to step up, but remains one of the people. And gosh, clericalism has done terrible things to the church. And, if we could recover a sense of the minister having a gift in one or other direction, but not in a sense that he or she was therefore more important or etc., it would be far healthier. And just what you've described, I love that, the Tuesday on the Old Testament passage, the Thursday on the New Testament, just chatting it around with people. You'll benefit. Everybody will benefit from the preaching. And, a win-win. What's not to like?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What does next week look like then? You said you had nothing in your diary, so you've got no trips planned, I guess, unless they're still penciled in for early next year. You didn't have the joy of chairing a week-long meeting.
Yeah.
So what does the kind of coming weeks, what do they look like? What are the kinds of things that you've started to tentatively pencil in alongside phoning 1,000 ministers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted to be doing stuff like this, Stewart, and other things. I've done some things for radio and so on, some podcasts, and yes, convening, moderating meetings and things like that. But by way of being somewhat more proactive, I've got a couple of things in mind, and they're not firmed up as such, but I think I'm going to go down this road. One thing I'm thinking about is calling it Monday night with the moderator, okay? And we'll put out something on Monday evenings. And what I'm looking at there is doing conversations with people almost like we're, just like we're doing now. It might be hosted on Zoom or somewhere like that. And really my feeling is that there can be much more comes out of that than me just doing my thing. I could every night of the week, if I wanted, just put something out in Perils of Wisdom for the moderator or something like that. But I think there's more to it than that, probably. And honestly, I don't have 365 Perils of Wisdom, so we'd run out by the early summer. So I'm thinking of just getting in conversation with people, and that would be everything from Doug Gay, John Drain, those theologians who have an eye to mission. But it would also be about, for example, there's a guy I'm going to do this with who, came through heroin addiction, through some of our local ministries. So, yeah, I'm going to get into conversation with guys like that, and just put that out there and see if people can engage with that. Another couple of things I'm going to do is just by way of some kind of engagement that hopefully people can relate to. And forgive the kind of cliched tabloid type titles. I may refine those, but I'm thinking about moderator at the movies. Now, I love my movies, and I never go to a movie, Stuart, without thinking, without getting about 10 sermon illustrations. I mean, if you just watch movies deal with life. And as a minister, I'm dealing with life. So I'm thinking through that little series to engage with particular movies, get online interaction, talking about movies and see what lessons for life come out of those. Where's the spirituality in that? And my other one's going to be that I'm thinking about is Moderator on the Munros, because there's my other big passion. And I never go into the mountains without that becoming more than a physical exercise, but a spiritual exercise. And so I want to engage with people about that as well. How do we be in the outdoors world where we find God in such moments? So I just dropped those couple of ideas in as I'm beginning to develop thoughts and plans about how I might engage digitally as we go forward.
Those sound fabulous. Actually, I'm liking that, and they're all M's as well. So you've got a whole alliteration thing going. So
that's what I mean. As I say, if I wasn't a minister, I'd be a headline writer for the Sun.
It's brilliant. I'm looking forward to the movie thing already. I share your passion, and I'm looking forward to hopefully you dressing up as characters from the movie as you host that, as you in your quiz.
Some folks will know what that's all about, and others go, "What's he talking about?" But anyway, it was
thinking, who is this guy?
Yeah,
all these wigs.
Yeah, cool.
I think, but those, those kind of speak to the things that we've been talking about. So there's you obviously have a huge passion and concern for the church, and so to talk to and about to people like Doug and John Drain and people like that about where the church is, and to make that a conversation that other people can access.
Yeah, that's
a hugely important thing. But then to engage with cultural things like movies and mountains, and to give people a sense of this place, which I think is an amazing thing to be able to do. Also to take, it goes back to what are your questions? Movies address people's questions, don't they? They take an issue and they form a story around about it and present that in a way that we can then resonate with in some way, and to open that up is, the same task as preaching in many ways, isn't it?
I think it is, and but my deep down hope, Stuart, is that in those kind of formats and with those kind of subjects and those kind of ways in, can we break out beyond the church? Now, I'm sure there are biblical metaphors that will come into play in all of that, but I just wonder if we just stick to it in a very traditional sense of, like in youth group days, everybody would have great fun, and then at the end there would be a little God slot. I mean, if I just churn out a bunch of God slots, I think a lot of people, there'll be a bunch of people would enjoy that. I'm not decrying that, but I've got a bigger vision, and I'd love to engage, further afield, than the traditional audience, if I can put it that way. And my hope is, naively or otherwise, that if we begin to talk about movies and stuff like that, using that as a platform, then, maybe other folk begin to tune in and think, actually, quite like talking about spirituality. Yeah. And you talked about the church there, Stuart, and I think of a very fine balancing act. I absolutely love the church, that God has called me into, but at the same time, I'm not precious about it. And what I mean by that is that, if there was no Church of Scotland as of the 31st of December this year, the kingdom goes on. So that's what I mean by saying I'm not precious about the church, but it's here and I love it. I genuinely love the church. And so everything that I'm about is for love of the church, but for the bigger goal, because I want to serve the kingdom. And that sort of goes way above church, doesn't it? And, institutional sense of that.
It really does. That seems like a perfect point to finish, Martin. Thanks so much for your time. I realise that even though you've got nothing in your diary, your time is still incredibly precious. So I'm delighted that you chose to spend some time with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And listen, Stuart, thank you for setting up this podcast. I mean, the minute I saw it, I thought, there we go again. Stuart Cutler's onto something. And you've got that about you, Stuart. So keep it up for the good of the church and for the good of the kingdom.
Thank you. Thank you.